In 1671, the Dutch East India Company paid its shareholders a cash dividend of 40%, not over 10 years, in a single year. Over its first 2 centuries, the company averaged around 18% a year. That is the number people quote to prove it was the greatest investment in history. It is also the number this video is going to take apart. Because when you value the dividends the way the shareholders receive them, that 18% falls to about 7.5. Same company, same books, half the return. To see where that number really comes from, go back to the beginning. In 1602, a merchant in Amsterdam put 100 guilders into the Dutch East India Company. He held the share. He took every payout and bought more. And within a lifetime, that stake was worth thousands. By the end of the century, 100 guilders put in at the start had grown to just over 65,000 guilders. That is with every single dividend reinvested year after year. The figure comes from a reinvestment index built by the historian Lodewijk Petram, working from the share prices and dividends recorded on the Amsterdam Exchange. So the story is true. A share in this company could make a family rich. That is the version everyone tells, and it is not wrong. 65,000 guilders from 100 is a fortune in any century. It is just not the whole ledger, because that 65,000 only exists if you never needed the money, not once in 98 years. Hold that thought. We are going to come back to what it cost to wait that long, because the waiting is the whole trick. The company sold shares to the public in 1602 and raised about 6.5 million guilders. This was new. Before this, you invested in a single voyage, and if the ship sank, your money sank with it. The share spread that risk across a whole fleet, and the charter made a promise about payouts. It said the company would hand out a dividend every time it brought home goods worth 5% of its capital. On paper, that is a machine for printing income. Ships come back, spices get sold, shareholders get paid. That promise is where the 18% comes from. Across the long run, the dividend the company declared averaged around 18% of a share's face value. 18% a year, decade after decade. Compare that to a sailor working the same company's ships for 7 guilders a month, and you can see why people put their savings in. On paper, the share earned more sitting still than a working man earned at sea. Say that out loud, and it sounds like the best thing an ordinary person could own. If you want the version of history where the numbers are pulled from the archive instead of invented, subscribe. That is the whole point of this channel. Every figure here traces to a document, and the documents are listed under the video. Watch what happens when you stop reading the promise and start reading the payments. The company did not pay a dividend for its first 8 years. When the first one finally came, in 1610, it was not paid in money. It was paid in spice. We know the terms because they survive in the company's own records, worked through by the historian Oscar Gelderblom. That first dividend went out almost entirely in kind. Shareholders were handed pepper and mace valued against the face of their shares. Only a small slice came as cash, about 7.5%. And even that was reserved for the people who agreed to take the spice. Think about what that means for a moment. You own a piece of a spice company. Your reward for owning it is spice. To turn that reward into money, you have to go out and sell it yourself. In the same market, the company has just flooded with the same goods. The dividend was real. Whether it was worth what the company said it was worth is a different question. And that question is the whole video. So let's do what the people quoting 18% never do. Let's take one shareholding 100 guilders of face value and trace what it paid in 3 different kinds of year: good, ordinary, and bad. The best case is the one we opened on. In 1671, the dividend was 40% and it was paid in cash. On 100 guilders of face value, that is 40 guilders. Real money in your hand, spendable the same day. There's no honest way to turn a 1670s guilder into today's money. Too much has changed in 400 years, and anyone who gives you a clean modern figure is guessing. So we will not try. We will price it against something from inside the period instead. An ordinary sailor on a company ship earned about 7 guilders a month. That figure comes straight from the company's own pay ledgers. So a single year's dividend on a 100 guilder share was close to 6 months of a working sailor's pay. That is an enormous payout. In a good year, the headline was not a lie. So keep the good year in mind because it is the version everyone remembers. Cash on time, half a year's wages from a single share. If every year had looked like 1671, the company really would have been the best investment in history, exactly as advertised. The problem is that most years did not look like 1671, and the company started by looking like the opposite. The 18% hides something simple. It is measured against the face value of the share. It is not measured against what you paid for the share. And nobody paid face value for long. The company's stock price climbed. By the second half of the 17th century, a share traded at around 4 to 5 times what it first sold for. On the price series, Petram reconstructed from the exchange records. So the dividend was measured against one number, and you had bought in at a much bigger number. Let's put real figures on it. Take a share with a face value of 100 guilders. In an ordinary year, the company declares 18%, so that share throws off 18 guilders. Good so far. But by the 1650s, you did not buy that share for 100. You paid 4 or 500 for it. And at 18 guilders on money is not 18%. It is closer to 4. That is the trick the headline plays. 18% of face value sounds like 18% on your money. It never was. On the price, a real buyer paid the same dividend was a low single-digit yield. Say it plainly. The number you were quoted was measured against a price nobody paid. Put the two problems together. Part of the dividend arrived as spice you had to sell yourself, and the percentage was measured against a face value nobody paid. Value all of it honestly, and the return comes down hard. Take the company's first charter, the decades where the records are fullest. The historian Fem Gastra reconstructed the real return from the company's own distribution accounts. It comes to about 7.5% a year. 18 on paper, 7.5 in reality. That is the number from the start of this video, and there it is. The number on the ordinary year. Now the bad year. Go back to that first dividend in 1610. On 100 guilders of face value, the part that arrived as cash was only about 7.5 guilders. The rest was spice. Pepper and mace handed over at a value the company set. And here, the evidence gives us a clear edge and a soft one. The clear edge, the records tell us the dividend was mostly spice, and that shareholders disliked both the terms and the value. The soft edge, those records do not hand us a clean market price for that exact pepper in that exact autumn, so we cannot state the loss to the guilder. That is where the archive stops and reconstruction begins, and I would rather tell you that than pretend to a number I do not have. But we do not need the exact price because the shareholders left us something better than a price. They left us a decision. In one of the company's home ports in Cuisine, the shareholders looked at the spice they were being offered, worked out what it would fetch, and refused to take it. They forced the company to draw up a separate cash scheme for them in the years that followed. People do not refuse a dividend that is worth what they are told it is worth. The refusal is the loss on the record in their own hands. And the loss got worse the moment you tried to fix it. To turn your spice into money, you had to sell it. But every other shareholder was holding the same pepper, trying to sell it in the same week, in a market the company itself supplied. More sellers, same buyers, and the price falls further. The very thing that was supposed to be your reward was now competing against you. So the bad year was not just a small dividend. It was a dividend that lost value in your hands while you were holding it. The company's 40% promise became a sack of pepper you could not sell for what the company claimed, and a sliver of coin. If a channel that puts the receipt on screen instead of guessing is the kind of thing you want more of, this is the moment to subscribe. So how do we get back to 65,000 guilders? How is the dream version true and the 7.5% true at the same time? The answer is patience most people could not afford. That 65,000 only appears if you bought in at the start, reinvested every payout for nearly 100 years and never once needed the money to live on. You had to be able to take a dividend of pepper, sell it at a loss, and put what was left straight back into more shares every year for a lifetime and then some. The people who could do that were already rich. They did not need the dividend, so the dividend could compound. The shareholder who needed the payout to eat took the spice, sold it into a glutted market, and got the 7.5% or worse. The same company, the same shares, two completely different investments, sorted entirely by who could afford to wait. So both the numbers are true. And now you can see how. 65,000 guilders was the reward for a century of not needing your own money. 7.5% was what you got if you did. The headline picked the first shareholder and quietly forgot the second. That is the thing a rate of return can never tell you. A single percentage assumes everyone earns the same rate. This one did not. It paid the patient and it taxed the desperate, and it called both of them the same 18%. Which brings us to the one shareholder who did the maths early and refused to play. Isaac le Maire had been a director of the company. He fell out with its leadership, and in 1609 he did something no one had done before. He organized a group of investors to sell the company's shares short. They borrowed shares, sold them, and spread word that the company was weaker than it looked, betting the price would fall so they could buy back cheaper. It was the first documented bear raid in history. The authorities were alarmed enough that in 1610 the states of Holland banned short selling outright. The ban did not really work, and versions of it kept failing for the next 2 centuries. And Le Maire's own story does not end where you would expect. His raid failed. The price did not crash, the company did not bend, and he came out of it in legal trouble rather than a fortune. He did not get rich betting against the company. What he got was the technique. Because Le Maire was the first person to look at this company and treat it not as a fortune to hold, but as a price to be right about. Everyone else was asking how much the share would pay them. He asked what the share was actually worth, decided the crowd had it wrong, and put money on the gap. That is the same question this whole video has been asking. The 18%, the spice, the price nobody really paid. Le Maire was just the first to ask it out loud, 400 years before the rest of us, and to bet on the answer.